When I started bulking at the age of 14, I weighed only 135 pounds at 6'2". As you can imagine, I didn't carry a lot of muscle mass. Look, when I first started lifting, it took me years to see any real progress. I only benched 225 pounds after around 4 to 5 years of consistent lifting 4 to 6 days a week in the gym. However, the truth is, even after training for 3 to 4 years, I still couldn't bench to 25. What I needed to do to actually reach that milestone was bulk. And not just bulk for a few months, bulk for a year or two. Only by the time I turned 19 did I actually bench to 25 for the first time. But here's the truth. I think much of that had to do with not getting into a calorie surplus for long enough. I stayed around 135 to 140 pounds for several years. Then, around age 17 or so onwards, I bulked up properly for the first time. Fast forward to today, and I've gotten as heavy as 250 pounds at times, but I'm usually sitting around 220 to 230 pounds. These periods of extended bulking have really helped me gain most of the muscle I've ever gained. And if you're currently struggling to gain as much muscle as you would like to, I urge you to get into a consistent surplus, and yes, indeed, bulk for all of 2025. In fact, I stepped on stage at 200 pounds when I was 20 years old at 6'2". But most of that so far has just been a personal experience. What about the research? Stick around until the end of the video for my recommendations on how to best bulk to gain muscle for the whole year. When it comes to bulking, we really only have 4 studies. But these 4 studies are relatively consistent in what they show. Bulking does generally benefit gaining muscle, at least directionally. When you compare being in a surplus to being at maintenance, or being at maintenance to being in a deficit, as you consume more calories, things generally look better as far as how much muscle you're able to gain. The first ever study on bulking came in the early 2000s by Rosnick and colleagues. Interestingly enough, in this study, they didn't actually intend to study bulking. They intend to study the effects of supplementing a protein and carb supplement compared to not supplementing with anything. In the group that supplemented with this carb and protein supplement, they ended up eating 1,800 more calories than usual, a whopping 4,300 versus their usual 2,500. The maintenance group, a control group, just stayed at their usual calories. The results? All groups gained muscle. The maintenance group stayed at essentially the same body weight and gained around 1.5 kilograms of fat-free mass, while losing a bit of fat in 8 weeks. The group consuming the supplement, on the other hand, who was in a large surplus, gained around 3 kilograms over 8 weeks. However, nearly all of that body weight gained was fat-free mass, suggesting they grew around twice as much muscle as the maintenance group. This study first created hype around the concept of bulking. There are a few limitations to the study too though. First, the supplement group ended up consuming more protein, which could confound the results. Second, the measurements taken weren't ideal. Finally, the maintenance group started with a bit more muscle and strength to begin with, which might explain why they gained a bit less. The second study on bulking by Garth and colleagues compared a lean gains approach of gaining only around 0.75% of body weight per month to a dreamer bulk approach where they gained 1.5% of body weight per month. Both groups consumed 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. In contrast to the study by Rosnick and colleagues, in this study, the athletes were trained. In a mixed sample, they had an average squat max of 265 pounds. Both groups lifted 4 days a week. The participants in the lean bulk group gained on average 1.2 kilograms of lean body mass across the study, whereas the participants in the dreamer bulk group gained on average 1.7 kilograms of lean body mass. However, they also gained nearly an extra kilogram of fat mass, or around 5 times as much fat mass as the lean gains group. So this suggests that while bulking might have a slight benefit in trained lifters, there is fat gain to be considered too. Bulking too fast might not be ideal. The third study by Smith and colleagues recruited participants with at least 6 months of training experience. Instead of separating participants into 2 groups, they simply gave all participants a protein and carb supplement while they performed a 3-day-a-week lifting routine. Since they didn't separate participants into an intervention and control group, they simply analyzed hypertrophy measurements as a function of how much body weight participants gained. Generally, most measurements of muscle growth showed a relationship with weight gained, such that gaining weight tended to improve hypertrophy outcomes. That being said, some measurements were discordant with one another. But this study does support the idea that being at least in a surplus helps you gain muscle. Finally, the most recent study on bulking by Helms and colleagues had trained lifters with an average bench max of around 225 pounds perform a complete 8-week resistance training routine composed of squatting, bench pressing, and several back and arm movements. The sample size in this study was quite small. That being said, they took participants and split them up into 3 groups. One group ate at maintenance, and the other 2 groups ended up eating in a slight surplus. They took a variety of measurements of muscle growth. While for the biceps, which was the muscle they were training most effectively using their routine, there might have been a slight benefit to being in a surplus, for all other measurements of muscle hypertrophy, things ended up looking pretty similar. Given that this study featured the most highly trained lifters yet, it's possible that as you become more advanced, the effect of a surplus becomes a bit more modest. Or at the very least, that you can tailor your surplus to how advanced you are. When it comes to strength though, greater strength gains are generally seen as your surplus increases in size. So overall, summarizing those 4 studies, being in a surplus does seem to modestly improve how much muscle you can gain. Bulking any faster than that will probably just result in excess fat gain. There are exceptions though. If you're a beginner, like the people in the Rosnick study, or just newbies in general, people on steroids, people with great genetics, you might be able to get away with a slightly faster rate of weight gain without getting too fat. But those are exceptions. There absolutely is a place for bulking if you're seeking to maximize muscle hypertrophy. In fact, weight gain in itself seems to cause some muscle growth, even in the absence of lifting. This is evident, for example, in sumo wrestlers, who sometimes do not perform any lifting, although you consider the sport some form of resistance training, and generally in overweight or obese individuals who are at least somewhat physically active. These populations tend to display higher levels of fat-free mass compared to normal weight controls. Whenever you gain weight, some proportion of that will be fat-free mass. That being said, based on the research, a modest surplus is actually sufficient to maximize hypertrophy. And, especially as you become an intermediate and advanced lifter, that might be the best approach to take. Instead of the bad method, bulking too fast and getting a bunch of fat in the process, a surplus of around 5% over maintenance seems to be enough. You'll likely get nearly all of the benefit without the excess fat gain that comes with large surpluses. This more moderate approach also means you actually get to bulk for a full year without just getting fat. Especially if you're the type of lifter to jump from bulking to cutting back and forth depending on how fat you feel on a given day, committing to a long-term bulk can be really helpful. If you're only bulking for 3 months before you need to cut again because you put on too much body fat, that will limit the amount of time you can spend in a productive phase for muscle building. The benefits of bulking for a whole year is especially present when it comes to lighter lifters or people who are still substantially below their genetic limit for lean body mass. Look, if you currently weigh 150 pounds, but your genetic ceiling is around 180 pounds at 10 to 15% body fat, there's no way to get to your genetic ceiling without at some point putting on some weight. And bulking for a whole year can take you a long way towards that ceiling. Many of my coaching clients who were once frustrated with the results never actually bulked properly. They kind of just add around their starting weight forever and never really consistently gained weight, and eventually didn't gain as much muscle as they would have been happy with. Likewise, one of the only supplements that is truly backed by science when it comes to getting muscle is creatine, specifically creatine monohydrate. These gummies by Tasty Gains have creatine monohydrate in them, which is why I'm comfortable recommending them. They're tasty, and if you dislike powder, they're a great way to get your creatine in. I'll have a link in the description for you to try them out. Bulking can also help you break through plateaus when your consistency in the gym isn't 100%, especially if you're combining subpar consistency in the gym. Say you're only getting 70% of your planned workouts in, with cutting or just being at maintenance calories. That is a recipe for minimal gains. Being in a surplus can flip that. But besides bulking, you also need to get your training on lock. And for that, I recommend Milo. Milo is a training app we've been working on for years at this point. And honestly, it's going to be the smartest training app on the market. It's the coach in your pocket. All of the latest exercise science is integrated to Milo, making sure workouts are individualized to you, your schedule, your routine, your goals. Go to mylab.com and register your email to be notified when it releases and to receive a lifetime discount if you register. Now you might say, even if I take a modest surplus, but I bulk for a whole year, wouldn't my body fat get crazy high? What about my health? Wouldn't that take a hit? With a 5% calorie surplus, you may only gain around a pound or two a month anyways. Provided you start at a reasonable body fat percentage, it's unlikely your health will take a meaningful hit. In a meta-analysis of nearly 1 million people by Jayedi and colleagues, the optimum body fat percentage for men tended to be around 22%, and for women around 35%. So, provided you're somewhere between 15 to maybe even 22% body fat as a man when you start your bulk, it's unlikely your health will meaningfully change as you bulk up to 20, 25, and maybe even up to 28% body fat. And the same applies for women. In fact, as long as your waist to height ratio is somewhere around 0.5 or lower, as far as your health and your body fat percentage goes, you're totally fine. In summary, if you want to build muscle, you should likely be bulking. It's not the main thing, but it is a thing you can do that will appreciably increase your muscle mass, especially if you're currently at a lower body weight and you long-term want to reach a higher body weight with more muscle mass. Another benefit of bulking is that it facilitates higher protein intakes. As I recently made a video about it, higher protein intakes all the way to potentially 1 to 1.3 grams per pound seem to facilitate gaining muscle mass. When you're cutting, getting this high in protein can be very challenging, but when you're in a surplus, you seemingly get protein from a variety of foods without even really paying attention to it. Now you might say, but I'm not diced yet. Surely if I'm not lean before I start my bulk won't be as effective as it could be. In terms of muscle gain, as I pointed out, don't worry, relax. Your initial body fat percentage does not predict how much muscle you'll gain. Just because you're a bit fatter doesn't mean your bulk will be unsuccessful. If you're worried you shouldn't bulk because of health, relax. As I mentioned, if you're around 20% body fat as a man, you have nothing to worry about. Around 30 to 35% as a woman, also nothing to worry about. Aim to gain around 0.5% to 1% of your body weight per month. Look, even if your last cut didn't go as planned, and you didn't get quite as lean as you wanted to, because you struggled to cut towards the end, that might actually be a great reason to start bulking. If you're in a long-term weight loss phase, taking a small period of time to bulk, especially if you've been struggling to cut recently, can be a great break. It can help quote-unquote reset your metabolism, raising your energy expenditure, making it easier to lose weight in the future. Likewise, if towards the end of this cut you felt like you were starving yourself, bulking for a little while, controlled bulk, can be a great approach.
If you want to cut just because you look leaner, that's totally fine. But for health, for muscle gain, it's not a big deal.
This will help reset your hunger a little bit as well. And even if you're not super lean yet, look, bulking and you're into ARC, they're all fine. But if you really want to be epic in the gym, you gotta wear some Rascal apparel. Go to rascalapparel.com and use code WOLF at checkout for 10% off. You may have read on the internet that being too high in body fat percentage when you start your bulk will impede how much muscle you're able to gain. However, a meta-analysis by Strong by Science looked at this concept across all studies they were able to find. There was no relationship between initial body fat percentage and how much muscle participants were able to gain. So even if you're in the high teens or the 20s or the 30s, as a man for body fat, you're likely not limiting your muscle growth. As for recommendations, aim to gain 0.5% to 1% of body weight per month. Over the course of a year, this will result in you gaining 6 to 12% of body weight. If you weigh, say, 200 pounds, that would be 12 to 24 pounds gained over the course of a whole year. You can stick to the lower end, closer to 0.5% if you're more advanced, and closer to the upper end, say 1%, if you're more of a beginner or an intermediate lifter. If you feel like you'll struggle to be able to tell whether you're gaining weight consistently, don't be. Weigh yourself daily and take 7-day averages of your weigh-ins. This will wash out many of the fluctuations and facilitate being able to tell whether or not you're gaining weight consistently. Regardless though, do not obsess over the exact amount of weight you're gaining. As long as you're in a consistent calorie surplus for a year, the main thing is being achieved. I would set my protein intake at 1 to 1.3 grams of protein per pound of body weight. This will likely maximize hypertrophy. Dr. Milo, bulking for a whole year. Until next time.